At 10, a ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars in the UK is delayed until 2035 as the Prime Minister shifts his approach to green policies. Rishi Sunak says he's still committed to achieving net zero on emissions by 2050, but says the current approach imposes unacceptable costs on hard-pressed families.
This was Rishi Sunak junking plenty of what Boris Johnson and others used to talk up and beginning to sketch out a case to try and argue he should win the election.
The other big story today, a surprise fall in inflation. We're gauging reaction here in Devon. What will it all mean for tomorrow's interest rate decision? Will they go up again? Also on the programme, at a star-studded state banquet in Paris tonight, King Charles calls on the UK and France to reinvigorate their relationship. After the disappearance of Nicola Bulley, we speak to a woman who helped drive the social media frenzy and find out why TikTok is being blamed. And the surprising link between cars and plastic pollution in the sea. I've been talking to the marine biologists here in Plymouth about their groundbreaking research.
On BBC London, a Met officer is to be charged with the murder of Chris Cabba, shot dead a year ago. And concern grows over the struggle to provide nursery places.
Good evening on a day of significant developments for the environment and the economy. I'm in Plymouth as we continue to report from different parts of the UK on stories that impact all of us. And tonight the focus is very much on the major changes to the government's green policies announced by the Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak said the present approach would impose unacceptable costs on hard-pressed families. But the decision has been criticised by some politicians and businesses. The Prime Minister has decided the ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars in the UK will be pushed back from 2030 to 2035. He said there will be far more time to transition from gas boilers to heat pumps and that the boiler upgrade scheme grants will increase from £5,000 to £7,500 with a new exemption for people in the poorest households so they never have to switch at all. But Rishi Sunak said he remains committed to the target of net zero by 2050. That's when the UK would no longer be adding to the total amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Well, let's go live to Westminster and our political editor, Chris Mason. Chris.
Sophie, this time last night, Westminster was digesting the leak that we brought you of what Rishi Sunak was considering to announce. That meant that those who were very much in favour of it were already out making that argument and making it with passion. And those who were less keen, a battalion of the angry, were already assembling. And quite the broad coalition it was too, taking in Ford, the motor company, and the National Trust. So this afternoon it was the Prime Minister's chance to actually set out what he wanted to do. How we get about, how we live our lives, and the government in a flurry about it. So, all eyes on Downing Street, the Prime Minister's ideas having leaked, his planned speech rushed forward.
Let me get straight to it. I know people in our country are frustrated with our politics. I know they feel that much gets promised, but not enough is delivered. I know they watch the news or read the papers and wonder why, in the face of the facts as they have them, choices are made as they are.
He said various green promises were unrealistic, even counterproductive, including this one.
I'm announcing today that we're going to ease the transition to electric vehicles. You'll still be able to buy petrol and diesel cars and vans until 2035. Even after that, you'll still be able to buy and sell them second-hand.
And here's his case for doing this and more.
The test should be, do we have the fairest credible path to reach net zero by 2050 in a way that brings people with us? Since I've become Prime Minister, I've examined our plans, and I don't think they meet that test. We seem to have defaulted to an approach which will impose unacceptable costs on hard-pressed British families, costs that no one was ever really told about.
The person behind a lot of the stuff being diluted today was Boris Johnson, and he's not happy. In a statement he said, "Business must have certainty about our net zero commitments. We cannot afford to falter now or in any way lose our ambition for this country."
Hey, Rishi, you're a liar. Can't you see the world's on fire? Hey, Rishi.
The Prime Minister hopes for all the noisy opponents today, there are plenty more quietly thinking he's got it right. But the group that advises ministers on emissions targets is worried.
The key thing for me is, where were we before this speech? We were not in a great place. So we were not on track to hitting the legal targets. Our last message to the government was they had to do more. And here we are today after the Prime Minister's speech, and it looks like it is now going to be even harder for us to get on track.
This is Hawes in the Yorkshire Dales. Like many rural areas, lots of folk here are reliant on oil-fired boilers because they're not on the gas network. The plan until today was that from 2026, people couldn't have bought a new one and would have had to get a heat pump instead. That won't happen now until 2035. Prime Minister also said he'd get rid of policies that would force landlords to upgrade energy efficiency in their homes. And from the detail, back to the argument. Number 10 will have known this would divide the Conservative Party, and it has.
But I'm much more concerned about affordability in a cost of living crisis, with inflation still above 6%, on doing things that make people's lives harder. And these targets were going to put costs on the British taxpayer, and I'm against that.
There is no significant body in Britain calling for us to reverse our ambition on this agenda, and it risks leaving the Conservative Party and the government on the wrong side of history.
Boris Johnson says you're faltering. Businesses say you've robbed them of certainty, and one of your former cabinet colleagues suggests that this risks putting you on the wrong side of history. Is this all because you're panicking about losing the election?
So look, lots of people are going to have their views, and I respect their right to disagree with me, but ultimately it's incumbent on them to then explain to families up and down the country why, if they disagree with me, they're willing to impose those costs, £10,000, £15,000 on those families in pursuit of something when it's not necessary.
Labour said tonight it would reinstate the ban on new petrol and diesel cars from 2030.
Just think of this. Britain could lead the world in this, but the government's decided to throw that out of the window. And it will actually cost British consumers more, because it costs more to fill up a car with petrol than it would be to power it with electricity. So everyone is a loser from what Rishi Sunak has just announced.
Fury and praise, grabbing attention, seizing the agenda is what this is all about, and boy, it has certainly done that. The big question now, will it be popular? Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Well, the Prime Minister said delaying the ban on the sale of petrol and diesel cars would align the UK with countries like France and Germany. Today's announcement will be a relief to some motorists, but a number of car manufacturers say the move brings confusion and uncertainties to their industry. Here's our business editor, Simon Jack.
Car makers have been working overtime and spending big to put batteries like these at the heart of the industry ahead of a ban of new petrol and diesel sales in 2030. Delaying that deadline by 5 years drew sharp criticism today from Ford's UK boss, who said it needed ambition, commitment and consistency from government, and today's announcement undermined all three. Moving, unpredictable deadlines deter investment, according to others.
Who wants to invest in a country that continuously changes its mind, changes its policy? A lot of companies have invested a lot of money.
But not all agree. Jaguar Land Rover said it brought the UK into line with France and Germany, and Toyota agreed that was pragmatic, while Vauxhall owners Stellantis said today's announcement would not change their plans. But what might it do to consumer behaviour? Electric and hybrid sales have accelerated quickly. These numbers show the growth in new sales last year alone. But they still make up only 6% of all cars currently on the road. The 2030 ban was forcing new buyers into an early, costly switch, according to driver groups.
Drivers will be very, very happy about this, because they're not going to be forced into spending a lot of money on electric vehicles, which hopefully by 2035 will become down to more reasonable levels. That's the good thing about this.
Opinions and the reasons for them was divided in Staffordshire today.
I think it's a bad move because everyone is pressing for the environment, improvements and all the rest of it, and it's going back.
I've just had to queue for over an hour to charge the car. I'm going to have to wait an hour for the car to be charged. We just don't have the infrastructure for it.
The right thing is help people because it's quite expensive at the moment, cost of living.
It gives people more chance and time to maybe save up and move over to electric.
2030 was always considered ambitious, but it was also a date which drove car manufacturing investment, charging installation and consumer behaviour. Some companies who've invested hundreds of millions of pounds are furious. Some consumer groups may be relieved. But for businesses, not just in transport, but in housing and in heating, what they crave is certainty and predictability. And today's sudden change is anything but that. For both businesses and consumers, the speed on the road ahead has changed, but the government insists the destination remains the same. Simon Jack, BBC News.
Well, let's go back to Chris at Westminster, who's been hit by a downpour. I hope you can hear me all right, Chris, but how much of all this is about eyeing up an election next year?
Yeah, welcome back to a sun-kissed Westminster. How much of it is about the election? All of it, I would say. Beyond Rishi Sunak's mild-mannered demeanour today, this was a demolition job of the instincts of previous Conservative governments, some of which he was a part of, and in particular those of Boris Johnson, who Mr Sunak suggested had been advocating policies that were shallow and ill thought through. So he attempted to make an argument that what he was doing was pragmatic and sensible and reasonable, and in so doing he was trying to set out a sense of his political creed, that he was willing to take on problems that the political system, if you like, had been willing to avoid in the past. And what we're going to get, I think, in the coming months are a series of political speeches from Mr Sunak that attempts to do that, that lean in a more politically aggressive way from him to try and make a case that that gap in the opinion polls between him and Labour is one that should narrow. His hope that he can be competitive come the general election. And on the issue of green policies, he has been confronted today, no doubt about it, by a wall of criticism from many. He will hope that those with megaphones and those with expensive PR departments will make that critique, but that perhaps millions of others more quietly might reflect that he's onto something. That's the gamble, but he has to gamble because of the political position he's in.
Chris Mason, braving the weather. Thank you. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, is with me here in Plymouth. The other big story today, a fall in inflation, 6.8 to 6.7% last month, and that was a big surprise.
Yes, well, it turns out that this is quite the spot to witness the inflationary waves hitting our economy. In the petrol tankers that were passing behind us a couple of hours ago, full of the fuel for our cars still, that's increasingly expensive, or in the trawlers of fish where the price is moderating. Put that together and the government had expected the inflation number to go up. It fell, a rare good surprise, but is it a turning point? I've been testing the water here in Plymouth.
Morning. The price of fish has been rising for 2 years. The latest figures show it's up 7% on last year, but it was closer to 3 times that at the beginning of 2023. For Plymouth fishing fleet owner Ben, the cost of doing business remains sky high.
We're all feeling it, aren't we? You know, the employees and the general public on the trawlers, you know, there's only so far you can go with the fuel going up. You know, it's very difficult, and if it keeps going up, there is a strong chance that the UK fleet, some of the fishing boats, a lot of them, will get tied up.
While these costs are passed on to all of us at home and in restaurants, on the Royal William dock front at least, they say they can see a turning point after 3 years of inflationary shocks.
And what about food prices? They were going up very rapidly. Have they sort of levelled off now?
Yeah, they are. I think, again, we try and purchase everything fresh. They're starting to kind of naturally level out, plateau, hopefully. I think there has to be a point where they need to be capped.
Today's figures showed the rate of overall price rises or inflation easing to 6.7%, better than expectations of a rise. It is still the highest of the major economies. Crucially, though, underlying measures of inflation, core inflation, which strips out food and energy, fell back significantly after being stubbornly high for months. Along the coast, on the other side of Plymouth, imports of petrol and diesel arrive, and the tankers line up to fill up for delivery to stations across the region. Inflation literally passes through these pipes as prices head back up again. Over 3 years, we've had a relentless series of global inflationary shocks arriving on our shores, and then that inflation hanging around the British economy longer than it has done for other similar economies. Well, today's numbers seem to show the first signs of us shaking off that record. But other dangers lurk. The black clouds from the petrol and diesel markets, for example, which remain as we retain our reliance on those fuels for our transport. The Chancellor welcomed the figures as progress, but households and businesses such as this microbrewery say they aren't out of the woods yet.
We have to be very, very diligent about which suppliers we use for which products, who's offering the best price of the day, and we do kind of split who we order our goods from just based on who's offering it at what rate.
The inflationary waves are still rough, but they've calmed enough for the likes of the Bank of England to ponder a pause in the rise in interest rates.
So Faisal, tomorrow a decision on interest rates. What can we expect now?
Sophie, for the past 5 or 6 months, we've had bad news surprises in inflation figures such as these. Today, it wasn't just about the headline rate, those underlying rates of inflation that show how far the inflationary virus has spread throughout the economy. They fell even more sharply. That is what the Bank of England watches to show or to illustrate that their medicine is working. And so they will see this, and we had expected, it's a pretty done deal, that interest rates would go up again tomorrow. That decision now more finely balanced for tomorrow. Probably there will be a rise, but there might not be. And then after that, like has just happened in the USA, we think interest rates stay at these sorts of levels for some time to come. So that is the better news, not quite a turning point yet.
Our Economics Editor Faisal Islam, thank you. For the first time in the history of the NHS, both consultants and junior doctors have been on strike today across England in their dispute over pay. The NHS says it's having to pay millions of pounds to plug gaps in staffing. Here, for example, in Plymouth, one consultant was paid more than £3,000 to cover a 12.5-hour junior doctor night shift. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
Are you ready for a microphone?
A&E on a double strike day. The same number of patients as usual, but not so many doctors. They say emergency care is safely maintained, but fewer medics elsewhere in the hospital causes bottlenecks.
Our patients here in the department will have to wait longer to flow through the department to get into a bed. As a result, we may have delays in offloading ambulances, and because ambulances can't offload, then they can't go out into the public and help other people. At the same time, we have more pressure in the department to see the patients who are backlogging in here.
My role is to make sure that we are creating the right conditions for...
The chief executive told me just how many patients had been affected by all the strikes so far.
Around 6,000 patients who we've had to cancel and re-provide their booking for either outpatients or for some form of treatment. And that has a really significant cumulative effect. This organisation has good teamwork and goodwill from our clinicians, but clearly that is put under ongoing strain the longer the industrial action continues.
This double walkout is for 24 hours. Next time in early October, it'll be for 72.
Well, it seems as if the hospital system's been under considerable pressure today, but at this stage there are no reports of serious operational problems. However, in a new development, another group of doctors, the specialist doctors, these are experienced medics who've opted not to become consultants, they've decided to hold a ballot on industrial action in England, saying they feel ignored and undervalued on pay. The government response is that the pay award on the table is fair and final.
Thank you. A Metropolitan Police officer is to be charged with the murder of a 24-year-old man who was shot in South London last year. Chris Cabba died when he was hit by a bullet that went through the windscreen of the car he was driving. The police officer, who is due in court tomorrow, has not been named. On the first day of their state visit to France, King Charles and Queen Camilla have attended a glittering banquet at the Palace of Versailles tonight, hosted by President Macron. Speaking in French, the King highlighted what he called the firm friendship between France and the UK and the need to work together to combat climate change. From Paris, our royal correspondent Daniela Relf reports.
The glitz and the glamour of the state banquet at Versailles. The actor Hugh Grant made the guest list, as did Rolling Stone Mick Jagger. Last to arrive, the King and Queen, welcomed by President Macron and his wife Brigitte. Inside Versailles' Hall of Mirrors, speaking mostly in French, the King thanked his hosts and stressed the need to work together to protect the environment.
Ensemble, nous nous efforçons de protéger et de restaurer notre monde naturel.
Earlier, the King and the Queen were given a ceremonial welcome at the Arc de Triomphe, full of pomp and pageantry and reminders of shared sacrifice. The post-Brexit relationship between the UK and France has been bumpy, but there was a show of unity from the King and the President as they shared a sunroof down the Champs-Élysées. State visits are about strengthening future relationships, finding common ground. But on this trip, there is a touch of nostalgia too.
Je me rappelle le plaisir que j'ai eu.
During her reign, the late Queen made 5 state visits to France. Her son will walk in her footsteps this week, revisiting some of the same places. But right from the start, the message of this visit was clear. Even the flypast was a joint enterprise. The French Air Force and the Red Arrows flying together for a trip where shared experiences will be the focus. Daniela Relf, BBC News, Paris.
Now, they're called online frenzies, posts on social media that encourage disruption and disorder in the real world. A BBC investigation has found they're being driven by the social media app TikTok. Former employees say TikTok isn't tackling the issue for fear of slowing the platform's growth. BBC Verify's Mariana Spring has been looking into it.
Like everybody else on TikTok, I'm obsessed with this Idaho murder case.
What connects false accusations of murder in the US?
4 students were brutally stabbed to death.
Amateur sleuths turning up in a British town, and antisocial behaviour and vandalism in UK schools. The answer is they are all examples of TikTok frenzies identified by the BBC. When you post a video on TikTok, it can be pushed to users everywhere on the For You page at a speed and scale that doesn't seem possible on other social media platforms, creating a frenzy of posts. Former employees and creators have told me how this design means people are seeing videos they normally would not see and being incentivised to behave in a harmful way to produce more popular content.
The search for mum of 2, Nicola Bully, continues, 8 days after she went missing.
Nicola Bully's disappearance earlier this year shocked the UK. An inquest ruled the 45-year-old died by accidental drowning, but conspiracy theories exploded on TikTok, with police saying it interfered with the investigation.
Hello. Hi. Lovely to meet you.
Heather ran one account, racking up millions of views posting about the case, having never shared content like this on TikTok before. In one video, she falsely suggested footage of Nicola leaving the house on the morning of her disappearance was really her friend Emma. It received 3.6 million views.
Whenever you post something and it gains traction, TikTok will send you little emails of encouragement telling you that you've received this many views, you're a hit. If you post something and you receive a lot of positivity from it, I think that can definitely change your behaviour, whereas before you might not have had that level of empowerment or entitlement. Heather seemed to really regret becoming caught up in this frenzy, and she told me that without TikTok, she just doesn't think she would have participated in this way.
Lucas, not his real name, is one of several TikTok ex-employees I spoke to for answers about these frenzies.
It grew so fast that they couldn't possibly keep up with or predicted every single where the app was going to go. And in general, they don't want to. They don't want to stand in the way of entertainment growing quickly on their platform. It's about money. The more users they have on the platform spending more time watching videos, they can sell more ads, sell them for a higher price. It's probably the most addictive platform that we've encountered yet, and I think that's a real danger, especially because of how young the audience is and how impressionable they are.
TikTok told the BBC, our platform reflects conversations happening up and down the country and in the media. Our recommendation system is designed to prioritise safety, suggesting a range of content, proactively interrupting repetitive patterns, and reducing the reach of videos containing unverified information. Prioritising safety is not only the right thing to do, it makes business sense. Speaking to ex-employees and users, it seems that these frenzies are difficult to keep up with, and it's hard to know when and where the next one will happen. Mariana Spring, BBC News.
And just to say, you can watch the TikTok effect on iPlayer right now. It's also on BBC Three tomorrow at 9 p.m. Now in football, Arsenal and Manchester United began their Champions League seasons tonight, and there was a familiar face in the team for Bayern Munich. Joe Wilson has been watching.
In theory, potentially, Harry Kane could have gone to Manchester United. Bayern Munich did the real deal. It's United here in a shade of green. Christian Eriksen with an early chance, the manager looking for some luck. Well, he was watching Andre Onana, the new goalkeeper he signed.
It's a terrible mistake by Onana.
Oh dear. Before half-time, emphatically, Bayern led 2-0. Here was United optimism, 20-year-old Rasmus Højlund, just a glimpse. Because the video referee saw a handball here worthy of a penalty. Think Harry Kane would miss the opportunity?
Kane scores. Clinical.
He's joined a winning team. Bayern led throughout, ended up winning 4-3. Even with their goals, United still search for direction. Arsenal, back in the Champions League, were unstoppable against PSV Eindhoven. Saka sharp for the first goal. Accomplished finishes followed before half-time by Trossard and by Gabriel Jesus. All the Arsenal forwards were right on target. And the best finish of the lot might have been this from Odegaard. Arsenal 4-0, Europe take note. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Now, marine biologists here at the University of Plymouth have spent the past 20 years trying to identify the source of microplastics, the tiny particles found on land and sea. It's long been known that many come from plastic bottles and bags, cosmetics, even clothing fibres. But the team has identified another kind of microplastic that's polluting these waters, and it has surprised them. Millions of vehicles use our roads in Britain. Every time their wheels turn, the tyres leave something behind. Tiny particles of rubber. Now marine biologists are trying to find out just how many of them are ending up in the sea.
I'm holding a bag, about 4 kilograms of tiny bits of rubber. These are the particles generated when you drive along the road. Every time you put the brakes on, the friction will generate tyre particles. All of those particles are entering the environment, including the marine environment here.
Beneath the surface here in Plymouth, amongst the cuttlefish and lobsters, the tyre particles are so small they're impossible to see. So the scientists here have had to develop new tests to try to measure how many are ending up in the sea.
I've been sampling some sediments from underneath roadside drains in the estuary, which is where, when it rains, all the particles get washed into the waterways. We've also been looking at what would fall out from the atmosphere right next to a roadway. And we've also been looking for tar particles in surface waters and seeing if they're getting exported out to sea.
So let's see what we've got in this first sample.
Today they're scooping up mud from the Tamar estuary.
When we get this back to the lab, we can work out what the proportion of tyre particles is amongst the natural mud that we'd expect to be on the seabed.
And this is what they'll find under the microscope. Black, elongated rubber particles, finer than a grain of sand. New chemical tests give the team a much better idea of how many there really are.
We've been tracing microplastics in the environment for 30 years. We've been tracing the sources. We've looked at the microbeads in cosmetics, the fibres coming from clothing. But actually, I think that the biggest proportion could be from tyre particles. It might even be as much as 2/3 of all the microplastics entering the environment.
So what about the impact on humans?
It's a long way from getting the answers in terms of possible effects on human health, and I don't want to ring the alarm bell on that, but certainly the concern is there, and that's why we're probing into those questions a little bit more.
Since the team started this research 6 years ago, they've been looking at ways to reduce this form of plastic pollution.
We're only just learning about what the potential solutions to this emerging problem are. They're likely to lie in better driver behaviour, correct adjustment of the tyres, but probably most importantly, you can help to reduce the emissions of plastic to the environment by better design.
Professor Richard Thompson telling me about his research, which should be finished next year. Now let's have a look at the latest weather. Chris Fawkes is joining us, and we had torrential rain and very strong winds here today, and it's been pretty bad for a lot of people, hasn't it?
That's right, Sophie. Yeah, there have been a few impacts around the country today. We started off with strong winds in Capel Curig in northwest Wales, where gusts hit 70 miles an hour for a time. Did have reports of a few trees down in Wales. And torrential rain, well, again, the same place, Capel Curig, has picked up 133 millimetres of rain in the last 36 hours, a large portion of a month's worth of rain. And the rain continues to fall down. In fact, on the back edge of this weather front, we've got something called line convection, where the rain gets really intense, could cause some localised flooding as it works across East Anglia and South East England. But it's not the only place that will see heavy rain. We've got some of that affecting the northwest of Scotland at the moment, along with strong winds, gusting gale force well into the 50s of miles an hour at the moment, into the Highlands and probably the Scottish Islands, seeing similar gusts of wind. On the whole, it's a cooler night compared with last night. For many of us, temperatures getting down into single figures. And then over the next couple of days, this area of low pressure that has the remnants of Hurricane Lee mixed in with it, well, that's going to stay slow moving to the north of Scotland. So, weather-wise, sunny start to the day for many areas, but this band of rain in northwest Scotland will sink southwards across the central lowlands and into Northern Ireland through the day. Strong winds with that. England and Wales, it's a day of sunshine and showers. Really heavy downpours, I think, heading into parts of Wales and southwest England in particular. Our temperatures back to average for the time of year. Same area of low pressure, still across the far north of Scotland. Northwesterly winds bringing widespread and frequent showers across the north and west. But showers will develop across central and eastern areas through the day as well on Friday, some of them heavy and thundery. Temperatures, again, around 15 to 18 degrees Celsius. Better weather for the start of the weekend. Most of us having a dry day on Saturday, but there will be some rain just fringing into the west late on. But then it's a return of some wet and windy conditions for the second half of the weekend. Sophie.
Chris, thank you. And that's it from the BBC News at 10 here in Plymouth. There is more analysis of the day's main stories over on Newsnight with Victoria Derbyshire, which is just getting underway on BBC Two. But the news, of course, continues here on BBC One, because it's time now to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. From all of us here, good night.